7:30 in the evening in India, and we are back again with a spotlight on G20. Our lens today is on promoting foundational literacy and numeracy, especially in the context of blended learning, a sub-vertical within the education vertical under the G20 framework. Foundational literacy and numeracy is a child's ability to read basic texts and solve basic mathematics problems. It is also one of the major themes of India's National Education Policy 2020. Now, let me share with you the present state of foundational learning around the world. Even though access to schools has increased globally in the last few decades, this has not translated into actual learning. It is projected that in 2030, about 43% of children in low and middle income countries will still be learning poor. This means that so many children in those countries will not be able to either read or understand simple text by age 10. On India at G20 today, we ask, can India as G20 president join hands with other G20 member states to upscale learning system reforms and address the challenge of foundational learning, since this is the basis for all future learning? I'm Munna Bhattacharya. Let's get started with the top stories. Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates 108th Indian Science Congress via video conferencing, underscores the importance of women's participation in development, terms women-led development as a major priority area of India's G20 presidency. India's digital payment interface UPI sets another milestone with record high 74 billion transactions worth more than 12 trillion rupees in December 2022. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant terms UPI as the payment system of the future. Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the 108th Indian Science Congress via video conferencing today, where he underlined the importance of women's participation in development. Speaking on India's G20 presidency, PM pointed out that women-led development is one of the high priority subjects being taken up by the chair. Let's listen in.
अभी भारत को G20 समूह की अध्यक्षता की जिम्मेदारी मिली है। G20 के प्रमुख विषयों में भी विमेन लेड डेवलपमेंट एक बड़ी प्राथमिकता का विषय है। बीते 8 वर्षों में भारत ने गवर्नेंस से लेकर सोसाइटी और इकोनॉमी तक इस दिशा में कई ऐसे असाधारण काम किए हैं जिनकी आज चर्चा हो रही है।
India's National Education Policy 2020 prioritizes foundational literacy and numeracy for all children as an urgent national mission. And in 2021, India's Ministry of Education launched Nipun Bharat Mission for ensuring that every child in the country necessarily attains foundational literacy and numeracy by the end of the 3rd grade by 2026-27. Prime Minister Narendra Modi too has stressed on the importance of ensuring foundational learning. UNICEF, a knowledge partner of the Government of India for the education vertical in G20, is also working to ensure that all children in India have access to inclusive and equitable quality education, and one of its 3 programming areas under its country program is early childhood and education. Here's more on how the Government of India is working towards ensuring foundational learning in India and how it can take its learnings to other G20 member states.
Foundational literacy and numeracy refers to the ability to read with understanding and perform basic mathematical calculations by the end of grade 2 or 3. These, along with social and emotional skills and well-being, lay a strong foundation for further learning and development. Those who fail to attain basic competencies in foundational literacy and numeracy find it difficult to catch up in later classes and fall behind, creating wider learning gaps. This also increases the chances of these children dropping out of the school system altogether. Even though access to schools has increased in the last few decades, this has not translated into actual learning. The State of Global Learning Poverty 2022 update indicates that at the current rate of improvement in 2030, about 43% of children in low and low middle income countries will still be learning poor. This means so many children in these countries will be unable to read and understand a simple text by age 10. So there is a need to redesign approaches to achieving universal foundational literacy and numeracy, just like India is doing, guided by its National Education Policy 2020. NEP 2020 seeks to build a strong base of early childhood care and education from age 3, a change from the earlier system in which children in the 3 to 6 age group were not covered in the 10+2 structure. The change is aimed at promoting better overall learning, development and well-being. India's Education Ministry has launched a national initiative for proficiency in reading with understanding and numeracy, or Nipun Bharat Mission, under Samagra Shiksha, for ensuring that every child in the country necessarily attains foundational literacy and numeracy (FLN) by the end of grade 3 by 2026-27.
फाउंडेशनल लिटरेसी एंड न्यूमरेसी के विकास को एक राष्ट्रीय मिशन के रूप में लिया जाएगा। प्रारंभिक भाषा का ज्ञान, संख्या का ज्ञान, बच्चों में सामान्य लेख को पढ़ने और समझने की क्षमता का विकास, ये बहुत आवश्यक होता है।
The mission focuses on providing access and retaining children in foundational years of schooling, teacher capacity building, development of high quality and diversified student and teacher resources or learning materials, and tracking the progress of each child in achieving learning outcomes. It focuses on children in the 3 to 9 years age group, including preschool to grade 3. The mission aims to ensure that children who are in class 4 and 5 and have not attained the foundational skills are provided individual teacher guidance and support, peer support, and age-appropriate and supplementary graded learning materials to acquire the necessary competencies. The goals and objectives of the mission are required to be achieved by all government, government-aided, and private schools, so that universal acquisition of foundational learning and numeracy skills can be achieved by 2026-27. The Government of India launched Diksha, or Digital Infrastructure for Knowledge Sharing, in 2017. It is a national platform for school education and an initiative of National Council for Educational Research and Training (NCRT). Here, teachers can find interactive and engaging teaching material to make their classes interesting. Students can understand concepts in an easy and interactive manner and test their learning through self-assessment, practice exercises, and parents having access to Diksha app in their mobiles can follow classroom activities and clear doubts outside school hours. In view of its experience of using platforms such as Diksha, as G20 President, India can bring together education stakeholders from around the world to strengthen effectiveness of foundational literacy through blended learning by leveraging technology, setting clear learning goals, developing appropriate curriculum and teaching resources including in local languages, developing strong learning assessment, monitoring and evaluation mechanisms, and by capacity building of education implementers. Bureau Report, DD India.
And for perspective, we are being joined by Terry Durnian. He is Chief of Education, UNICEF India, and Professor Suniti Sanwal. She is Head, Department of Elementary Education, NCERT, or National Council of Educational Research and Training with the Ministry of Education. Such a pleasure to have the two distinguished guests here on India at G20. Mr. Durnain, I'll begin with you. Considering that there is a projection that 43% of children in low and middle income countries are likely to be learning poor in 2030, which means that the world will be far from achieving the Sustainable Development Goal number 4 related to universalizing education, ensuring its access. What role do you think India can play as G20 President as far as promoting foundational literacy and numeracy in all the G20 member states is concerned?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I think this President of G20 provides an amazing opportunity to really demonstrate his leadership in this area. I think where a lot of countries are struggling to even recognize that learning is an issue and the poverty around it, India has really grasped this and recognized the importance of addressing the issue. And I think the innovative mission, as you mentioned, Nipam Barak, is an innovative and visionary national mission to really address the problem and the challenges, recognizing that learning needs to start foundationally from the beginning, and it's the basis for all future learning. So I think this plays an amazing opportunity for India to share this globally with other G20 countries.
I'll come to you, Professor Sanwal, now. What role is NCERT playing as a knowledge partner of the Education Ministry for the education vertical in the G20 framework to promote foundational literacy and numeracy across the G20 member states? I'm sure there are a lot of experiences and best practices that India has to offer.
Yes, sure. Actually, even during the COVID time, NCERT came and we designed a new training program known as Nishtha for the teachers and as well as the heads of the school. And whatever the learning outcomes were there, it was so how children learn was very important for teachers to understand, and how the pedagogies in the classrooms need to change in order that children achieve the learning outcome. So a Nishtha program on foundational literacy and numeracy was launched in an online mode, where it was launched by 33 states and 12 lakh teachers have been trained in that. And so not just the teacher capacity building, but also heads of the schools need to come and understand what it takes to learn the foundational literacy and numeracy. And in addition to that, our strength, like toy-based pedagogy, we have different toys across the state, across the different regions and states in the country. So how toys can be leveraged in the early years is what we have come out with the handbook. We did an international and national webinars on toy-based pedagogy. We have also come out with Vidya Pravesh, which is a 3-month play-based module that every children in class 1 needs to take, and especially those who have not done the early childhood care and education. They get advantage over with this module, which is known as Vidya Pravesh. And as you said, the Diksha resources, lot of resources have been launched in Diksha platform. It is bite-sized videos, it is worksheets, infographics explaining the learning outcome to the teachers. So a whole lot of innovative resources are there which can directly be used by the teachers in their classroom, and they can also share the best practices and the initiatives that they have taken in their classrooms. And similarly, we have also launched Nishtha Early Childhood Care and Education, which is for the capacity building of the master trainers. They may be from the Anganwadi side or maybe from the CRC and BRC. So a lot of initiatives have been taken and tried on the ground by NCERT to share with other countries.
Right, so you've referred to Diksha, Nishtha as well as e-Vidya. Are these some of the best practices or templates, Mr. Durnian, that the Ministry of Education can look at projecting to the G20 member states when a mutual learning exercise takes place in the seminars going ahead?
Most definitely. I mean, some of the examples that the professor mentioned are world global class examples. And I think another best practice is the recent foundational learning study that was conducted by NCERT.
Yes, we're coming to that.
Globally significant in terms of the scope and depth, and in terms of setting the baseline for the whole Nipam Barak program. But as well, which is really exciting and fantastic, was really setting the benchmark for 20 languages, which is really unheard of. And I think this experience can really be a great example to other countries who also have similar contexts with multilingual education, and how can they also really start setting the baseline and room from which to build and transform the system and children's learning from the very beginning. I think this is, and I think the technology aspect, which was mentioned before, the India has not just one or two, looking at low tech and high tech, 200 channels directly to home is an amazing initiative, as well as online and offline. And I think these provide excellent examples globally and can be highlighted during the G20 presidency.
So let's come to the report card that you were referring to. I understand you were referring to the foundational learning systems report card for 2002. What are some of those highlights under the Nipun Bharat mission, and is that to a template that India would like to project to the G20 member states? I'll come to you, Professor Sanwal.
Okay. Yeah, so NCRT has taken up in collaboration with UNICEF and Ministry of Education the study on foundational learning, and it has been done in 20 languages for the first time, and it is indeed one of the best examples that we have had benchmarks against the global proficiency on literacy and numeracy, and different aspects of literacy and numeracy have been measured here, and we have the benchmarks for 20 languages.
Okay. So we have the benchmarks for 20 languages, you are telling us. Now in the context of blended learning particularly, Mr. Durnian, what are some of the examples that India can project, and what are some of the best practices globally in this context that they can be mutual learning from?
Okay, blended learning is really taken off through the last 2 years of COVID. And I think you need some really excellent examples where the capacity development of teachers in terms of how to use digital tools in the classroom. And you must look at it essentially not replacing teachers, but you're empowering them to really look at how can they bring more children into the school. But also these tools can reach children outside of the school. So look at digital platforms. I think like your introduction, looking at Diksha, reaches children in school, it provides a platform upon which children can learn, but also it's looking at India, which is the national education architecture, which again is a global best practice which can be shared. And how can this link into other blended models to really enable children, to empower students to reach out and explore. And then it comes back to the important role of teachers in providing that guidance. So it's really building on what's happening in the classroom, but extending it. I think India's got really examples across the country that it'd be very important to highlight, looking at some of the work that's happening in Bangalore, but also in UP.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Professor Sanwal, blended learning has become the norm, particularly in urban areas we see during the COVID-19 pandemic and even in the post-pandemic world. To what scale would India like to take this? Because still there would be areas in parts of India that would not be touched by blended learning. They would still be continuing with the physical format of learning. Also, is India looking at models in different parts of the world to perhaps imbibe through the use of technology to make blended learning more common?
So yes, definitely, and even we in different states are taking a lot of initiatives and exploring different ways. But as you highlighted, we also have a digital divide. Mm-hmm. So we have to use blended learning, but as well as support with other resources that are there, and that the teachers and reap in the parent and the community, and many of the states are doing very good work in this area, and they have involved parents, communities, and also leveraging technology.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Durnian, what are the constraints that you see in the use of blended learning in India, and how, by way of greater collaboration with G20 member states, can that be overcome, or we can further build upon our own achievements vis-a-vis use of digital tools for learning?
I mean, looking at this, I think I mean, the main constraints is looking at in three areas: looking at availability of devices, connectivity, and data. And I think India's made huge strides in terms of bringing connectivity to the most remote areas. I mean, there's ways to go, but I think in terms of one of the good examples India can bring is how it's leveraged the private and public partnerships in terms of bringing connectivity to the remote areas and schools, and looking at how to leverage that to increase students' ability to access digital learning. But also important is that digital learning or blended learning, the strength of it is really linking what's happening in the classroom, what's happening outside the classroom, and building on that. And extending it. So I think these are really good practices which, and a lot of countries are just beginning, and I think that the experiences and lessons that India has overcoming some of the barriers can be an excellent example to other countries.
Right. I wanted to know from you about, other than low and middle income countries, are there developed countries as well who face huge gaps in terms of foundational learning, or is that a problem only limited to low and middle income countries? And in case developed nations are also facing this as a challenge, what is the scope of international partnerships across levels, with India being perhaps a first among equals, with so much focus being given to foundational learning by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and that is reflected in the National Education Policy 2020. Mr. Durnian, yeah.
Okay, sir. No, it's a really global issue. I think it's more pronounced maybe in lower middle income countries, but it's an issue globally, because really it's recognizing that unless children develop these skills, reading, writing, that it really impacts all future learning. So there is a lot of challenges globally, and I think looking at a country, for example, where I'm from, I remember high school students teaching who still had challenges with basic literacy and numeracy. And it links into social economics to a certain extent. But I think in terms, and also looking at areas that had challenges in terms of access. If you look at countries that have remote areas, like India has, how does India solve these challenges? I think they provide interesting examples to, going back to a country like Canada, that has far remote areas, or other countries in Africa or Asia that equally have challenges in bringing, linking children to technology.
Mr. Durnian, one more question to you before I come to Professor Sanwal, and very quickly, if you could tell us, UNICEF's priorities in terms of redressal when it comes to foundational learning promotion, particularly via blending learning from India's G20 presidency. Your top expectation.
Sorry, can you say that again, please?
Yeah, UNICEF's top expectation from India's G20 presidency in the context of promoting foundational literacy and numeracy, particularly through blended learning.
I think there's a lot of expectations. I think if I speak from UNICEF per se, when I'm talking to colleagues who are being challenged because literacy and numeracy really isn't policy and a national mission, and when we look at India where there's a recognition there's a problem, and there's been this ambitious and visionary national education policy, and with Nupam Barak really being rolled out with evidence, I think it's an example, but also high expectation. How can other countries learn, and they're interested in learning about how do we address this issue at a systems level, and looking at sustainable solutions, not in the short term, but over the longer term. So it's really built in and sustained, and linking to issues around digital transformation, but also how do students learn to address sustainable issues around, for example, climate change.
Okay, so you're talking about system level reforms with a long-term perspective and also educating students about something like lifestyle for environment, which India stands for in the context of green development and climate change. Professor Sanwal, last words from you. Do you think that this is going to be an issue which will be of high priority for the Education Ministry, including for the NCERT, of promoting system level reforms with a long-term perspective, not with a short-term perspective?
Yes, exactly. And Nipun Bharat Mission exactly does that. It talks of 5-tier systemic reform, wherein we are talking of reforms at the national level, at the state level, district level, and even at the block and the institutional level. So we are definitely talking of systemic reforms in order to, better the literacy and numeracy standards of children in the country.
Right, so India is already doing that, you are saying, and perhaps this is an opportunity to build on that further to ensure that system level reforms are undertaken across all the G20 member states and low and middle income countries which are outside the G20, because India has said that it will be a voice of the global south as the chair of G20. Thank you so much, Mr. Durnian and Professor Sanwal, for joining us with your views.
Thank you.
India's digital payment interface UPI has set another milestone with record high 7.82 billion transactions worth 12.82 trillion rupees in December 2022. Digital transformation is among the key issues that will be discussed during G20. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant has tweeted expressing joy over the record high transactions via UPI. He wrote, 2022 has seen a lot of records broken. Digital payments via UPI witnessed record high transactions, representing an year-on-year increase of a whopping 90% jump in transaction volume and 76% rise in value. And with that, we come to the close of this edition of India at G20. Thanks for watching.
पेमेंट फेल? लेकिन पैसे तो कट गए। गई मेरी मेहनत की कमाई।
हो जाएगी भरपाई, चिंता मत कर मेरे भाई। अगर डिजिटल ट्रांजैक्शन फेल हो जाए और अकाउंट से पैसे कट जाएं, तो बैंक समय से पैसे लौटा देगा, वरना कॉम्पनसेशन का है प्रावधान। नहीं तो आरबीआई के ओम्बुड्समैन को शिकायत करें आप।